They were expecting me for Thanksgiving only because I was supposed to bring checks for school. I arrived, and while they were all sitting at the table, I handed them not checks, but lawsuits demanding the return of every dollar I'd given them for the past 10 years, plus interest. It turns out I'd been forcing them to sign receipts disguised as greeting cards. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. My name is Carol, and for the better part of 68 years, I thought I understood the shape of my life. It was a good life, a solid American-made life built with my husband, Frank. We had our son, David, and we poured everything we had into him. Not just money, but values, honesty, integrity, a firm handshake, and looking a person in the eye. Frank was an engineer, a man who believed in structure and rules, that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. I was a high school history teacher, so I believed in stories, in patterns, in the way the past always comes back to inform the present. Frank passed away 15 years ago, bless his heart, from a sudden heart attack on his beloved golf course. It was devastating, but it left me with a comfortable nest egg and a legacy to protect. The real heart of that legacy, though, wasn't the stocks or the paid-off house. It was David, and by extension, his 2 children, my grandchildren, Ava and Leo. After Frank was gone, David and the kids became my world. They were my reason for getting up in the morning. David had his father's mind for details, and my love of people. He built a successful architectural firm from the ground up, and he was a wonderful father. He and his wife had divorced amicably years before, so as the kids entered their late teens, I was the one constant matriarchal figure in their lives. Oh, we were close back then, genuinely close. Sundays were our days. We'd have pot roast at my house, the smell filling up every room just like it did when David was a boy. Leo, who was Frank's spitting image, would spend hours in the garage with me tinkering with the old lawnmower, mostly just listening to my stories about his grandpa. Ava, with my fiery spirit and her mother's looks, would help me in the garden, and we'd talk for hours about her dreams, her friends, her future. She wanted to be a doctor. Leo was studying business, hoping to one day join his dad's firm. They were good kids. They called just to chat. They sent me pictures from college. They remembered my birthday without a reminder from their father. They loved me. I know they did. And then the unthinkable happened. 10 years ago, we lost David. It wasn't a slow illness. There was no time to prepare or say goodbye. A drunk driver ran a red light. That was it. One moment, my son, my vibrant 42-year-old son, was driving home from a late meeting, and the next, he was gone. The axis of our family shattered. The grief was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that smothered all the light and warmth. Ava was 21, and Leo had just turned 19. At the funeral, they clung to me, their bodies racked with sobs that felt torn from my own chest. We were a trio of shipwreck survivors, clinging to the same piece of driftwood in a raging sea. I promised them, and I promised my son in the silence of my own heart, that I would always be there for them, that I would make sure they were taken care of. The first request for money came about 6 months later. It was Ava. She called, her voice still thin with sadness. "Grandma, I'm a little behind on my tuition this semester. Dad always handled it, and with everything going on, I just got a notice. It's a few $1,000s. My heart ached for her. Of course she was struggling to keep things straight. Her father was gone. "Don't you worry about a thing, sweetheart," I said, pulling out my checkbook before she even finished the sentence. "You focus on your studies. Your grandpa and I made sure we could help. This is what the money is for." I wrote a check for $5,000, feeling a small sense of purpose. This was how I could still mother my son, by taking care of his children. A few months after that, it was Leo. His car, an old clunker he'd had since high school, finally gave up the ghost. "I can't get to my part-time job without it, Grandma." he explained, sounding utterly defeated, and I need that job to pay for my books. Again, the checkbook came out. Another 5,000. It felt good. It felt right. But then the requests started changing. The space between them shrank. The reasons grew vaguer. It wasn't just a tuition shortfall, it was lab fees and special equipment. For Ava, the future doctor, this made sense. But the receipts she emailed me looked odd, generic. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Leo needed money for a business development trip for a college club, but when I later asked him what he learned on his trip to Miami, he got defensive and mumbled something about networking events. The warmth in their voices started to cool. Our Sunday dinners became sporadic, then stopped altogether. Visits to my house, once spontaneous and joyful, were now almost exclusively prefaced by a phone call about a financial emergency. The calls stopped being about catching up and started with, "Grandma, hi, is now a good time? I have a bit of a crisis." The loving grandchildren I knew were being replaced by two strangers who viewed me not as their grandmother, but as a bank teller. They'd sit on the same floral sofa where they used to cuddle up to watch movies with me, but now they sat on the edge, keys in hand, eyes darting toward the door, just waiting for me to write the check so they could leave. There were no more questions about my garden, no more stories about Grandpa Frank. The transactions were brisk, efficient, and cold. My heart didn't just ache, it started to crack. Was this just what grief did? Did it turn good kids into hollow, grasping ghosts? Or was something else going on? I know this part is hard to hear because it was devastating to live. The calls stopped being about catching up and started with, "Grandma, hi, is now a good time? I have a bit of a crisis." The loving grandchildren I knew were being replaced by two strangers who viewed me not as their grandmother, but as a bank teller. They'd sit on the same floral sofa where they used to cuddle up to watch movies with me, but now they sat on the edge, keys in hand, eyes darting toward the door, just waiting for me to write the check so they could leave. There were no more questions about my garden, no more stories about Grandpa Frank. The transactions were brisk, efficient, and cold. My heart didn't just ache, it started to crack. Was this just what grief did? Did it turn good kids into hollow, grasping ghosts? Or was something else going on? I know this part is hard to hear because it was devastating to live through. The truth was about to come out, and discovering it was going to be its own special kind of hell. But discovering the truth and doing something about it, that was going to be glorious. The real turning point for me was about 5 years ago. Leo called, frantic. He needed $20,000. Immediately. "It's for an investment opportunity, Grandma," he'd said, the words tumbling out of his mouth so fast they barely made sense. "A friend of my professor's. It's a sure thing, a tech startup, but I have to get it on the ground floor, and the deadline is tomorrow." Something inside me, that quiet instinct that had kept me safe for over 6 decades, screamed no. My Frank was a cautious man. He taught me and David to look at every angle of an investment. You don't rush. You don't give in to pressure. "Leo," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, "email me the prospectus. Let me take a look at the business plan." He panicked. "There's no time. Grandma, you have to trust me. This is my one big shot to get ahead, to make Dad proud." Using his father against me. The blow was so low, so foul, it took my breath away. And that's when the history teacher in me took over. History is all about evidence, about primary sources. I knew I needed to start collecting my own. "All right, sweetheart," I said, a new, steely resolve forming in my gut. "Come on over. I'll have the check for you." When he arrived, I had the check and a beautiful Hallmark card, a snowy landscape, I think. Inside, I'd written a loving, grandmotherly note, but on the facing page, I'd neatly typed out a small paragraph on a piece of paper and glued it in. It read, "Received from Carol Jensen as a personal loan the sum of $20,000. I acknowledge this amount is to be repaid upon reasonable request." Below it was a line for his signature. He stared at it. "Grandma, what is this?" I gave him my most befuddled, sweet old lady smile. "Oh, it's just for my records, honey. My new accountant is a real stickler. Says with amounts this large, I need to keep track for tax purposes. Gift taxes, all that nonsense. It's just a receipt, really, so we both have a copy." I tapped the signature line. "Just sign it for me, sweetie, for the accountant." He hesitated. For a moment, I thought he'd refuse. I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. But his desire for the money was stronger than his suspicion. He grabbed a pen, scribbled his name, took the check, gave me a perfunctory peck on the cheek, and was out the door in less than 30 seconds. That was the day the ATM started keeping receipts. From that day forward, every single check came with a card. A birthday card, a get-well-soon card, a thinking-of-you card. Inside, each was a loving message and a carefully worded acknowledgement of the loan. Sometimes I called it a loan, sometimes an advance on their inheritance, sometimes a gift to be documented. The wording varied, but the core elements were always there. The amount, my name, and a line for their signature. And they signed. Every single time. Ava for her board exam fees that cost as much as a new sedan, Leo for the down payment on a condo that never materialized, thousands upon thousands of dollars all flowing out of my accounts and into their hands, each transaction documented by a sentimental greeting card signed with greed. They got careless. They thought I was a dotty old woman lost in grief and slipping into senility. They underestimated me. They saw me as a relic of a bygone era. They had no idea that history teachers are experts in one thing above all else: collecting, organizing, and interpreting evidence of past transgressions. And their transgressions were adding up to a mountain. This past year alone, they drained me of nearly $100,000. The final insult was Ava's call a month before Thanksgiving asking for $75,000. $75! It's for a specialized medical fellowship in Switzerland. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, she chirped. The lie so audacious it was almost impressive. That's when I called my lawyer, a sharp young woman who had taken over her father's practice. I laid out the last 10 years on her conference table, the bank statements, and a stack of nearly 50 greeting cards, all signed. She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Carol," she said, slowly, "this is incredible. This is a meticulously documented paper trail of personal loans disguised as gifts. They won't have a leg to stand on." The plan was set. The lawsuits were drawn up. The process server was on standby. My lawyer wanted to have them served quietly, professionally. But I said no. This betrayal wasn't quiet or professional. It was personal. It was intimate. It was a knife in the heart delivered at my own dinner table. And that's where the reckoning needed to happen. So I called them. "Kids," I said, my voice filled with a warmth I hadn't felt in years, because this time it was real, the warmth of impending justice. "I want to have a proper Thanksgiving this year, the whole works, just the three of us. Let's get our family back together." They agreed, of course. Ava immediately added, "Oh, that's so wonderful, Grandma. And listen, about that fellowship, did you happen to have a chance to—" "Bring your appetite, sweetie," I'd said, cutting her off. "I'll have everything you're expecting ready for you." And I did. I surely did. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned cold and gray, the sky the color of a steel pot. It suited my mood perfectly. I woke up not with the usual holiday flutter, but with the calm, steady certainty of a general on the morning of a battle. I went about my preparations with methodical precision. The turkey, a 20-pounder, was already brined and went into the oven at dawn. The scent of sage and thyme began to fill the house, a ghost of Thanksgivings past. of a time when the laughter in this kitchen was genuine. I peeled potatoes, my knuckles aching slightly, and my mind drifted to Frank. He would have appreciated the logistics of my plan. "Have your ducks in a row, Carol," he'd always say. My ducks were in a row, armed with subpoenas. In the center of my dining room table, amongst the good china and the crystal glasses that only came out twice a year, sat a large, beautiful floral arrangement. Tucked beside it were two thick, cream-colored envelopes. Not greeting cards, not this time. They were legal envelopes, addressed in my lawyer's crisp, elegant script. Miss Ava Jensen, Mr. Leo Jensen. Inside each was a summons, a formal complaint detailing the dates, the amounts, and the acknowledged loans, demanding full repayment of a staggering sum. Ava's totaled over $450,000. Leo's was just shy of $380,000, plus interest, calculated at the prime rate. The sight of them sitting there, so official and incongruous next to the gravy boat, sent a thrum of pure, unadulterated adrenaline through my veins. They arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, right on schedule. They came in separately, Ava first, then Leo 10 minutes later. A clear sign they didn't even bother to coordinate. They were dressed in expensive clothes that I had no doubt paid for. Ava in a silk blouse and cashmere scarf, Leo in a tailored wool coat. They kissed the air near my cheek, their eyes scanning the room, landing for only a moment on the formal place settings before sweeping the sideboard where I usually left their gifts. "Smells amazing in here, Grandma," Ava said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Just like old times," Leo added, rubbing his hands together. "Can't wait to eat. I'm starving." The subtext was clear. Let's get this meal over with so we can get to the money. We made small talk as I pulled the turkey from the oven. It was stilted, painful. I asked about their jobs. Ava was now a resident at a top hospital, and Leo was a junior analyst at an investment firm. They gave me vague, polished answers. I talked about my garden club and a new book I was reading. It was a parody of a family gathering, each of us playing our parts on a stage of unspoken resentment and deceit. Finally, we were seated. The turkey was carved, the mashed potatoes were steaming, the cranberry sauce gleaming like a pile of jewels. The table was laden with the bounty of a loving home, a stark contrast to the ugliness that was about to unfold. I let them take a few bites. I wanted them to be comfortable, to be unsuspecting. "Everything is so delicious, Grandma," Ava said after swallowing a forkful of stuffing. She placed her napkin in her lap and looked at me with that bright, expectant expression I had come to despise. "We are so, so grateful for you." That was my cue. I cleared my throat softly. "I'm glad you're enjoying it," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. "This year, I wanted to do something a little different. For the past decade, I've tried to give you kids a leg up to help you get established in your father's memory." Their faces lit up. They thought the prelude to the big payout had begun. "But," I continued, watching the light in their eyes flicker with confusion, "my accountant, you know, the stickler, he's been helping me put my estate in order. And in reviewing the last 10 years, we've found a significant number of outstanding personal loans that need to be addressed." Leo put his fork down. "Loans? Grandma, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the money for school, for cars, for down payments and investment opportunities," I said, my voice hardening just a little. I reached over and slid the thick legal envelopes across the polished wood of the table. "And I'm talking about the receipts you so diligently signed for me. You'll find itemized statements inside those envelopes, along with a summons." The color drained from Ava's face. Leo just stared at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it. With shaking fingers, he tore open the flap. Ava did the same. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rustle of thick legal paper. I expected yelling. I expected accusations, denials, frantic negotiations. I was prepared for a storm of anger. What I got was something else entirely. Ava's face crumpled. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a mask of pure, unadulterated despair. A sound escaped her lips. A choked, desperate sob. The lawsuit papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across her plate, a few pages landing in the mashed potatoes. Leo wasn't making a sound. He just sat there, staring at the envelope as if it were a coiled snake, his skin a ghastly shade of pale. A single tear rolled down his cheek and dripped onto the page, smudging the ink. He looked broken, defeated, but more than anything, he looked terrified. Their reaction wasn't what I expected. There was no rage, no indignant denial, just a deep, soul-crushing wave of what looked like horror. And just when I thought I had them cornered, the story I thought I knew, the one I had built so carefully on a mountain of evidence, completely fell apart. Stick with me, because what they said next changed everything. "He's going to kill us," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. It was so quiet I barely heard him. I frowned. "Who's going to kill you? My lawyer? Don't be dramatic." "No," Ava choked out, looking up at me, her eyes streaming with tears. She was shaking her head back and forth, over and over. "Not him. The other him. Oh God, Grandma, what have you done?" That was it. That was the moment the floor gave out from under my perfectly constructed reality. The phrase wasn't an accusation, it was a plea. "What have you done?" I leaned forward. "Ava, talk to me. What are you talking about? Who is going to kill you?" Leo finally looked up from the papers, his eyes filled with terror so profound it made my blood run cold. "Grandma, we never spent it. Not on ourselves, none of it." "What?" I scoffed, my resolution momentarily returning. "Of course you did. The cars, the clothes, the trips to Miami." "It was a lie!" Ava cried out, her voice raw. "All of it was a lie. We had to make you think we were selfish and greedy. We had to have a reason for needing the money." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "It was better for you to hate us than for you to know the truth." I stared at them, my mind reeling, unable to process what was happening. This was not in my script. "The truth about what?" I demanded, my own voice shaking now. Leo took a shuddering breath. He reached into the inner pocket of his expensive coat and pulled out his phone. His hands were trembling so badly he could barely unlock it. After a moment, he slid it across the table toward me. "The truth about David," he said, his voice hollow. I picked up the phone. On the screen was an email, dated just a few weeks after my son's funeral 10 years ago. The sender was an anonymous, encrypted address. The subject line was a single name: David Jensen. I began to read. "To the children of David Jensen, I know your father was seen as a pillar of the community, a brilliant architect, a great man. But great men have secrets. I possess documents, signed affidavits, and construction manifests that prove your father knowingly used substandard materials in the foundations of 3 major public buildings, including the downtown Children's Hospital. He did it to cut costs and pad his own pockets. This information, if released, will not only destroy his reputation and his firm, it will land you both in a cyclone of civil and criminal liability that will ruin your lives. His legacy will be a lie, and your futures will be over. But I'm a reasonable person. You will protect your father's memory and your own futures. This will be our secret. The first payment of $50,000 is due in 1 month. Instructions will follow. Do not go to the police. Do not tell your grandmother. If I even suspect you have told another living soul, the documents go public the next day.
My vision swam. The dining room, the food, the smell of Thanksgiving, it all faded away into a dull roar in my ears. The children's hospital? David had won awards for that project. He'd been so proud. He'd taken me on a private tour before it opened. He could never.
I looked up at Ava and Leo. They weren't my greedy, selfish antagonists anymore. They were two terrified kids who had been living in a private hell for a decade. They had been trying to protect their father's name, and they had been trying, in their own misguided, desperate way, to protect me. All this time, I whispered, the lawsuits on the table feeling like a pile of toxic waste. Every dollar went to him, Leo confirmed, his voice devoid of all emotion. He just keeps asking for more. The amounts get bigger, the threats get worse. Ava's fellowship in Switzerland, that was his latest demand, $75,000. He told us if we didn't deliver, he'd send his proof to you on the anniversary of Dad's death as a special present. The full, monstrous weight of it crashed down on me. I hadn't been a victim of my grandchildren's greed. I had been an unwitting pawn in a vile extortion scheme. And in my quest for justice, I had just pointed a loaded gun at the two people who had sacrificed everything to keep me safe from the truth. The ATM hadn't been an ATM. It had been a shield, and I had just shattered it. The rich, savory aroma of the Thanksgiving feast that had filled my home with such promise only an hour ago now smelled like ash in my throat. The food sat cooling on our plates, a mocking testament to a celebration that had died before it even began. My perfect plan, my righteous quest for justice, had collapsed into a pile of rubble, revealing a truth so much uglier than the one I had imagined. My first coherent thought was to clear the table, not from the food, but from the poison. I stood up, my knees feeling weak, and gathered the lawsuit papers from in front of Ava and Leo. The pages were crisp and heavy in my hands, each one a written record of my blindness, my failure. I walked them into the kitchen and, without a second thought, stuffed them into the metal trash can under the sink. It wasn't a legal solution, but it was a necessary one, an act of surrender and a declaration of a new beginning. When I returned to the dining room, my grandchildren hadn't moved. They were frozen in the same tableau of despair. I pulled a chair from the head of the table and sat directly between them, close enough to reach out and touch them both. "Look at me," I said, my voice softer now, stripped of all its earlier anger and filled with an ache that felt 1,000 years deep. They slowly lifted their heads, their young faces aged with a decade of fear. "I am so sorry. Forgive me, not just for this horrible Thanksgiving ambush. Forgive me for not seeing, for not knowing." Ava let out a small, shuddering sob, and to my astonishment, she reached across the small space and gripped my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "We didn't know what to do, Grandma. He told us if we told you, you'd be in danger. He said he had people watching you. We thought if you just thought we were spoiled and selfish, you'd be angry, but you'd be safe." The brutal, loving logic of it struck me like a physical blow. They had chosen to wear the mask of villains to protect me. They had sacrificed my good opinion of them, something I knew they had once treasured, to keep me out of the line of fire. The shame I felt was a hot flush that spread from my chest to my face. "We were going to tell you everything after Dad's firm was sold last year. The company was his life's work. The blackmailer's main threat was always destroying it. But after the sale was finalized and the name was changed, we thought we were free. We thought it was over." "What happened?" I asked, my grip tightening on Ava's hand. "We stopped paying.
For 6 months, there was silence. We started to breathe again. We thought we'd won. Then he came back, angrier than ever. He said that since we couldn't hurt Dad's company anymore, he'd just hurt us directly. He sent a package to Ava's apartment. I turned to Ava, whose face had gone chalk white again. What was in it? She swallowed hard. It was a beautiful, professionally done portfolio, like an architecture student would make. Inside were photos of Dad's buildings, but they were all photoshopped. Some showed cracks in the foundations. One showed the children's hospital with a whole wing collapsed. The last page was a mock-up of the front page of the New York Times. The headline was, "The Architect of Disaster, David Jensen's Deadly Legacy." And at the bottom, there was a handwritten note. What did it say? I pressed, my heart pounding. It said, "New game. The price has gone up," Ava whispered. That was when we started lying about bigger things. The condo, the fellowship, because he started demanding bigger amounts. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. This wasn't some random opportunist. This person, this monster, knew them. They knew their father. They knew their deepest fears and their greatest vulnerabilities. The history teacher in me, the one who looks for patterns and motives, kicked into high gear. My grief and my anger receded, replaced by a cold, sharp-edged clarity. The fear in my grandchildren's eyes was real, but so was the steel that was forming in my spine. He thought he was dealing with two scared kids and a clueless old woman. He was about to find out how wrong he was. Don't go anywhere, because this is where the ATM starts fighting back.
All right, I said, my tone shifting. I was no longer the grieving mother or the vengeful victim. I was the general again, but this time I had the right enemy in my sights. Tell me everything, every detail you can remember, every email, every phone call, every instruction for a money drop. For the next 2 hours, the story of their decade-long nightmare poured out. The food on the table was forgotten, the Thanksgiving holiday ceased to exist. We were in a war room, and I was finally getting my briefing. The blackmailer, whom they only ever referred to as him, was meticulous. He used burner phones and encrypted emails. The money drops were always elaborate and designed to prevent them from being followed. Leo would be instructed to leave a duffel bag in a specific locker at a bus station. Ava would have to convert the cash to untraceable cryptocurrency and transfer it to a digital wallet. The instructions were always clear, the threats always chillingly specific. He knew things he shouldn't. He knew the name of Ava's favorite professor in medical school. He knew Leo had a mild allergy to peanuts. He mentioned the specific golf course where my Frank had passed away. These weren't the details of a random hacker. This was personal. This was someone who had been close to our family. And the documents, I asked, the so-called proof against your father, did you ever see them? Never, Leo said. Only his descriptions of them. It was always just enough information to sound plausible, but he never sent a full page, never a clear photograph. He said showing us his hand wasn't part of the deal. Because he doesn't have them, I said, the conviction ringing with absolute certainty in my own ears. My son was an honorable man. He was his father's son. He would so sooner use substandard materials in a children's hospital than he would stop breathing. The documents were a lie, a complete fabrication. This was a ghost story designed to frighten children. The problem was, it had worked. My mind was racing, connecting threads, pulling at loose ends. Frank had been a brilliant engineer, and he'd taught David everything he knew. The records for every project, every material order, every inspection report from David's firm would be flawless. The blackmailer was counting on the fact that no one would dare investigate for fear of what they'd find. He was using David's sterling reputation as a weapon against his own children.
We need to call the police, Leo said, but there was no conviction in his voice. Absolutely not, I stated flatly. Not yet. A man this careful, this cruel, will have a contingency plan. If he even gets a whiff of an official investigation, he might just dump his fabricated documents online out of spite. The truth doesn't matter once a lie like that gets out into the world. It would still tarnish your father's memory, which is what we are fighting to protect. I stood and started clearing the table, a sudden, desperate need for action propelling me. As I scraped the uneaten food into the trash can, on top of my abandoned lawsuits, I knew what I had to do. My lawyer, Sharon, was sharp, but she was a civil attorney. I needed someone else. I needed someone who knew about people like this. I picked up my phone. First things first, I said to my grandchildren, who were watching me with a mixture of fear and a tiny, nascent flicker of hope. We're getting our house in order. I dialed Sharon's cell. She picked up on the second ring, sounding surprised to hear from me on a holiday. Sharon, it's Carol Jensen, I said, my voice all business. Happy Thanksgiving. I apologize for the interruption, but something has happened. A new development. Carol? Is everything all right? No, not at all. But it's about to be, I said. First, I am formally instructing you to withdraw and rescind the lawsuits against my grandchildren. File whatever you need to first thing in the morning. They are null and void. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. Carol, what on earth is going on? Did they... They did exactly what they had to do. I cut her off gently. I was wrong. I was profoundly and completely wrong. We are no longer pursuing a civil case for repayment. We are now building a criminal case for 10 years of methodical, high-stakes extortion against my family. The silence on the other end of the line was even more profound. My God, she finally whispered. Carol, you and your grandchildren need to be in my office at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And bring every single piece of paper, every email, every scrap of information you have.
I looked at the corner of the living room, at the antique secretary desk where for 5 years I had filed away greeting card after greeting card, each one a testament to my own hurt feelings. Oh, don't you worry, Sharon, I said, a grim smile touching my lips for the first time that day. I have receipts. Friday morning, not even 12 hours after my Thanksgiving disaster, the three of us walked into Sharon's polished, book-lined office. We didn't look like a family. We looked like the haggard survivors of a shipwreck, which in many ways we were. Ava and Leo's eyes were puffy and red-rimmed from a night of little sleep and many shed tears. I felt a cold knot of dread in my stomach, but it was overlaid with something new, a diamond-hard resolve. We carried 2 heavy banker's boxes. One was mine, filled with a decade's worth of my bank statements and the infamous greeting cards, each one nestled in a clear plastic sleeve like a precious artifact. The other box contained my grandchildren's evidence, printouts of emails from the blackmailer, notes on his chillingly casual phone calls, and complex diagrams of the money drop locations. Sharon was already there, a pot of coffee steaming on a side table. She had a legal pad in front of her, but for the first hour, she didn't write a single word. She just listened. She let Ava and Leo, their voices often cracking with emotion, recount the entire sordid history of the extortion. She looked at the threatening emails, her expression growing progressively tighter and angrier with each page. When Leo described the fake New York Times cover, she let out an audible hiss of disgust. When they were finished, she looked at my box. And this is your end of the financial trail, Carol? Every last dollar, I confirmed. She spent the next hour laying everything out in chronological order on her massive conference table. On one side was my carefully documented loan history. On the other was the blackmailer's demand history. They were a near-perfect mirror. My $5,000 check for Ava's lab fees was dated 3 days after an email demanding the exact same amount.
My $20,000 investment for Leo lined up perfectly with a demand for cash to stop the first threatened leak. My righteous evidence of their greed was in fact the most damning record of their victimization. It was an extortionist's ledger, and I had meticulously kept it for him. "This is astonishing," Sharon said, finally looking up, her eyes blazing. "The cruelty is one thing, but the precision, this is not some random online scammer. This is someone who knew your family. Someone who knew David." She paused, her gaze turning inward. "This requires more than just the police, Carol. An official investigation could be slow and might trigger the very public leak we're trying to prevent. We need to fight fire with fire. We need someone who operates outside the usual channels. Someone who can find a ghost." That was how we met Marcus Thorne. Sharon made a call to a number she had on a private, unlisted contact list. An old law school friend who went a different direction, was all she said. 2 hours later, Marcus Thorne walked into the office. He was a man in his late 50s, unassuming in a simple tweed jacket and worn jeans. He didn't look like a high-powered investigator. He looked like a retired professor. But when he shook my hand, his eyes, a very pale and startling blue, held an intensity that was anything but retiring. We went through the entire story again. Marcus listened with an unnerving stillness, his eyes never leaving the face of whoever was speaking. He absorbed every detail, asking only a few clarifying questions. He examined the printed emails, not for what they said, but for what they didn't. He looked at the server headers, the timestamps, the specific turns of phrase. Finally, he stood up and walked over to the conference table, looking down at the 2 mirrored timelines of payments and demands. "He's very, very good at hiding," Marcus said, his voice quiet. "But he's arrogant. 10 years is a long time to run a con. He's gotten comfortable. And he's made a mistake." "What mistake?" Leo asked, leaning forward. Marcus tapped a finger on the printout of the most recent email, the one demanding the $75,000 for Ava's fake fellowship. "He's using rephrases. Right here, the price has gone up. And here, in an email from 6 years ago, the price of your father's good name." This phrase, "the price of," he's used variations of it 7 times. He looked at us. "That's not just a threat. That's a verbal tick. It's part of his personal vocabulary. And this other detail, he always sets the deadlines on a Thursday. Always. It gives him Friday to collect and the weekend to disappear. It shows a routine. He has a 9-to-5 life. He's not a full-time criminal." My blood ran cold. A 9-to-5 life? This monster was living among us. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "He knows things. He knows your father used a specific brand of concrete sealer for his private projects. He mentioned it in an email to Leo to prove his inside knowledge. He knows about your peanut allergy, Leo. He knows your grandma loves her gardenias. Who had that level of access to your family?"
We started making a list. Old friends, former employees of my son's firm, distant relatives. The list grew, each name feeling like a potential betrayal. And then I remembered something. David had a business partner when he first started, I said slowly, the memory hazy at first. For the first couple of years, his name was Alan Peterson. He was the numbers guy, the CFO. David was the architect, the artist. "What happened to him?" Marcus asked. "They had a falling out," I said, remembering the arguments David had come home angry about. David caught him cutting corners, not on materials, nothing dangerous, but on bids. Alan wanted to lowball contracts to win them, even if it meant a loss, just to build the firm's reputation. David refused. He said, "The price of a good reputation is doing good work, not tricking people into it." They dissolved the partnership. It was bitter. The room went silent. Marcus stared at me, his blue eyes wide. The price of a good reputation. The phrase hung in the air, a perfect echo from the past. Marcus pulled out his laptop. "Alan Peterson," he murmured as he typed. What he found came up in seconds. Alan had tried to start his own firm after leaving David, but it had failed within a year. After that, he'd bounced between jobs, a series of failed business ventures trailing behind him. According to public records, his last known address was a modest apartment just 2 towns over. And his current job? He was a mid-level accountant at a local insurance company, a 9-to-5 man. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place. It had to be him, a man consumed by a decade of bitter jealousy, watching from the sidelines as my son's career soared while his own crashed and burned. He saw David's death not as a tragedy, but an opportunity. He couldn't destroy his rival's professional reputation while David was alive and could fight back. But he could threaten the memory of a dead man. He could terrorize his children. And he could finally make them pay. The trap was set for the following Wednesday, the day before the new payment was due. Following Marcus's instructions, Leo emailed Alan, still using the anonymous account, confirming he had the $75,000. He told the blackmailer that because the amount was so large, his grandma's bank had flagged it, and the only way he could get his hands on the untraceable cash was if his grandma signed for the withdrawal in person. He told the blackmailer he would have to meet them at a park pavilion halfway between our towns. Of course, Alan balked at first. It broke his cardinal rule, never meet in person. But greed is a powerful motivator. $75,000 was the biggest single payday he had ever demanded. Leo, coached by Marcus, was firm. He played the part of a terrified kid perfectly, saying, "I'm sorry, this is the only way. If you don't want it, fine, but I can't get the money otherwise." After a tense 12-hour wait, the reply came. A single word: fine. The day of the meet, the park was quiet. It was a cold November afternoon. I sat on a bench inside the covered pavilion, a large leather handbag at my feet. Inside wasn't $75,000, but a stack of blank paper and a small, high-fidelity audio recorder. Ava and Leo sat in Marcus's car, parked 100 yards away, watching. Plainclothes police officers, friends of Marcus, were disguised as joggers and city workers nearby. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I was no longer a victim. I was the bait. At exactly 3 p.m., a gray sedan pulled into the parking lot. A man got out. It was Alan. I recognized him instantly, though he was grayer and heavier than I remembered. He walked toward the pavilion, his eyes darting around nervously. He sat on the opposite end of my bench. "Do you have it?" he asked, not looking at me. His voice was the same clipped, impatient tone I remembered. "I do," I said, my voice calm. "But before I give it to you, I want to see the proof against my son. All of it." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "That's not how this works, old woman." "It's how it works today," I said, turning to face him fully. "I'm the one with the money, and I need to know that I'm not just giving it to some two-bit con artist who's been lying to my grandchildren for 10 years. His face darkened. "David Jensen was a cheat and a fraud. He cut me out, and he built his empire on lies." "He built it on talent," I countered, my voice rising. "Something you never had. He caught you trying to scam clients, and he fired you. This whole thing, this whole decade of torment you have put my family through, it was never about substandard materials, was it? It was about your pathetic, petty jealousy." That's when he snapped. The carefully controlled facade of the blackmailer crumbled, revealing the bitter, failed man underneath. "He got everything he didn't deserve," he spat, his face twisted in a mask of rage. "He planned everything perfectly. The anonymous accounts, the drops, the stories. I fed his kids a lie for 10 years, and they paid for it. They paid to protect a lie. Every dollar they gave me was a victory." "Yes," I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. I clicked the small button on the side of my purse, turning the recorder off. They did pay, and I kept all the receipts. On that signal, the park came alive. The joggers stopped jogging. The city worker dropped his rake. Within seconds, we were surrounded. Alan looked around wildly, the color draining from his face as he realized the trap he'd walked into. When he saw Marcus approaching, flanked by 2 uniformed officers, he seemed to shrink in on himself. The 10-year reign of terror was over. The ghost had been caught. The fallout was swift. With a recorded confession and the mountain of financial evidence I had so carefully collected, Alan didn't have a chance. He was charged with multiple counts of extortion, wire fraud, and harassment. The press called him the greeting card extortionist. He's now serving a 12-year sentence in a federal prison. As for us, the money is gone. Over $800,000. We could have tried to recover it through civil suits, but we didn't. The real victory wasn't getting the money back. It was getting our family back. The kids and I are closer than ever. The secret that had poisoned them is gone. And the truth, while painful, has set them free. Sundays at my house are back. The smell of pot roast fills the air again, but this time the laughter is real. The pain of the last decade won't ever disappear completely, but it has become a scar, a reminder of what we survived together. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but for me, this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my family story and protecting my son's legacy. It turns out I wasn't an ATM after all. I was a vault, quietly collecting the evidence that would ultimately buy my family's freedom. Now, I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you for coming on this journey with me.
My grandmother told me this story. Thanks for watching this video. Bye bye!